drug addiction, or maybe just addictions in general. That's what we're going to talk about today. Uh, just a reminder, if you don't know, this is basically how it works. I take a topic, I talk about a little bit from a sober perspective, and then I, or maybe we, uh, smoke some salvia together and go into a trance, and we see if Salvia has anything to say about the topic. Or sometimes she might want to talk about something else too. So we'll find out. But that's how it goes. So it turns out it's a little inconvenient because psychonauts like to think of themselves as clean cut, good citizens who um, have their shit together and are absolutely not drug addicts. But if you've known very many people who use psychedelic drugs, you'll realize that there is unfortunately a lot of overlap between people who have uh, healthy relationship with psychedelics and people who have serious drug problems or also other addictive patterns. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I'm not completely outside of it myself. I'm not a serious addict, but there's definitely been times that I smoked weed and probably didn't need to, and certain times when I was looking at certain websites and probably didn't need to do that. As he drinks his coffee for the third cup today. Uh, so what's the deal? Why are there so many people who are using psychedelics who actually have drug problems? Well, I think a lot of that is social. Part of it is that in most of these things are illegal, and the that briefcase that the person with all the tattoos has and has a funny briefcase, and you buy all of your like LSD and mushrooms from that briefcase. Well, it's also got heroin in it, and it's also got meth in it. So just socially, you end up in the same circles. Also, people who are interested in interested in exploring their minds sometimes go down the right paths and sometimes go down the wrong paths. So they overlap a lot. The good out. The other reason that I almost skipped, but is that some people, and this is why I'm making this video, is somebody mentioned this on one of my other videos, is that he was specifically trying to use salvia to address addictive problems. And he's not alone. It's well known to use psychedelics, really most psychedelics, to help with addictions, salvia included, and and that works for people, but it does end up meaning that that is another way in which addicts end up coming into our circle. So we have a lot of addicts in our community. So I'll talk a little bit about salvia specifically. Uh, you may or may not know this, but most psychedelics, they are triggering the 5-H derpa derpa whatever serotonin receptor. There's a lot of serotonin receptors, and there's a specific one that classic psychedelics trigger. And by triggering that, it can help you with your addictions. And since it's serotonin, not dopamine, it's totally non-addictive, and everybody who's not stupid knows that. Salvia doesn't. Salvia triggers the K opioid, uh, or dopamine. I don't think they call it opioid. Does that work? Anyway, the K dopamine receptor, right? There's what, three, I think, different kinds of dopamine receptors. And we associate dopamine with desire and therefore addictive patterns. And so on the surface, it sounds like, ooh, salvia, dopamine, bad. Ugh. Actually, the from what I've read, the relationship between the K opioid receptor and the other ones is that it's kind of like they work in opposition. It's kind of like your bicep and your tricep, right? If you only had a bicep, you'd be like, right? And if you only had a tricep, you'd be like, right? But we have both. They work in opposition, and that's why you can go, right? You can put exactly where you want it to be. That's the K dopamine receptor is the triceps balancing out the desire. So it is actually the anti desire receptor, which means that salvia has a lot of potential to help addicts. And there's a lot of research going on that topic from what I understand. But I don't think that it has actually turned into any meds or people really practicing very much, which means that there isn't a protocol to just show you. All we can do is really speculate. I can say that from my own life that it was just the other day. I was like, "Ooh, I'm ready to have a good time. Gonna smoke some salvia, smoke some weed," and then afterward, I just didn't feel like smoking weed. After the salvia, I mean, I could tell that my desire to do that had ramped down. But salvia only lasts like 10 minutes, right? And this is the big question with this is really the big question with addiction in general. It's easy to just say no. It's hard to just say no all goddamn day, every single day. Uh, so does can salvia help you with that? Well, I mean, what are you going to do? Smoke salvia all day? um, you know, that might get in the way of paying your taxes and driving to work and anything that isn't swimming in the field of heavenly bliss is going to not work out well for you if you're on salvia all day. Um, but remember, if you didn't have the salvia, you would still be in the same position. How are you going to just say no all day to your compulsive behaviors? This is speculation as to a practice, but it's worth experimenting. If using salvia was specifically what you're trying to do, if fighting addictions is specifically why you're smoking salvia, you could turn it. It would be worthy of an experiment, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I've done it with a billion clients or something. It would be a good experiment to build up a daily practice, and then after you come out of that space, put a little bit of attention onto letting it linger into your day, which actually it's not just an addictive thing. It is for all meditators. Is how do I infuse this energy in throughout my entire day when I'm out doing, pumping the gas and stuff. There's just no easy answer then other than it just takes a little bit of discipline to do it. But remember, with salvia, you're completely safe. You can do it multiple times in a day if you want to. There's no evidence that that's a bad thing. I'm bored. Are you? You've already clipped off my video. What the fuck? Ugh. Let's do this, okay? One impulse that people use to fight addiction is self punishment. There was a psychologist that I was into for a while. I've read quite a bit about addiction and studied it. I find the topic interesting. There's a researcher named McGonigal, I believe. I can't remember her. She's a young woman, youngish. I believe her last name is McGonagall, just like Professor McGonagall from Harry Potter. Anyway, she emphasizes that the idea of self punishment being useful is a big detriment to people getting over addiction. You see, we tend to believe in punishment as a useful tool, negative reinforcement. But the problem is that self punishment, judging yourself or taking things away from yourself, creates stress, and then that stress makes you more likely to do your compulsive behavior. So, what that means is that a loving acceptance of yourself, even when you fuck up, is actually a useful healing tool. This is paradoxical. Why would accepting yourself as an imperfect, compulsive person um, actually help you get over compulsive behaviors? But the reality is that this is something you should experiment with. Both the research, conventional research suggests this, and I think spirituality suggests this. A loving acceptance of the status quo is always the best way to improve the status quo and drive towards a better future. So if you think about your uncontrollable compulsive behaviors, bring them up within the salvia space. Allow your mind to wander to the areas that you don't feel good about. The salvia can help you um, find these details in your psyche. Find the embarrassment, find the frustration, and be the loving container for those emotions. Invite yourself to avoid those behaviors. Give yourself permission to avoid those behaviors. Don't assume that you are defined by the behaviors that you feel bad about. And paradoxically, if you do feel guilty, don't feel guilty about feeling guilty. Judging yourself, feeling guilty. It is natural. It may not be helpful, but but it's but it is perfectly natural and perfectly human. It's somewhat paradoxical, but accepting yourself as you are and being present with yourself and being present with your compulsive emotions and present with the guilt around those compulsive emotions. Uh, that's the spiritual path. That's the path of growth. Allow the cessation of compulsive behaviors and emotions to be the symptoms that may or may not arise from psychological healing and spiritual growth. The healing and growth themselves should always be the real targets. When he talked about original sin, Saint Augustine had a theological explanation for what original sin was that I always found moving. He said that people are always completely in love, but that there are two different kinds of love. There is a loving, what he called God, right? He was a Christian who was all gaudy. There is loving God, and then there is making the intellectual mistake of loving God's creations, and that this is what sin is. And he said people automatically come out of the womb doing it, and so it was original sin. But that's, for us, that's not relevant. The point is that sin, making a mistake, being less than you can be, is, in his view, kind of an intellectual, it's emotional, but also sort of intellectual mistake. It's when you lose the target, like the divine is the target. Or what we're talking about is, well, I mean, actually, God is a good metaphor in this case. Sometimes I talk about God and sometimes I don't. I don't take it very literally, but I don't take anything literally. So the point is that when we're dealing with our own parts of ourselves that we don't like, it obviously it's fine to focus in on those problems and try to solve those problems, but always remember that there's a bigger thing going on. You're a spark of the divine growing in, and whether or not you smoke crack or not is like kind of ultimately not as important as just doing the deepest healing and acceptance of yourself that you can, and widening out your circle of intellectual curiosity and your perceptual experience so that you can have spiritual experiences, most likely within the context of psychedelics. Explore the idea that working on your addictions is actually a means to an end, and the end is base level growth as a human being. And if sometimes you fuck up because that's part of learning. Just like if you're learning mathematics, you're not going to get every little arithmetic problem right. There's going to be definitely going to be times that you only got 93% or 83% or 43% on that test, but it doesn't mean that you're not going forward. There, I'm done. That was fun. I might talk about it again. I know addiction is important. I never know what to do at the end of my videos. They were just kind of like, brrr. I should come up with a little like dance maybe. This is the end of the video dance.